Hello, I'm Mary Ito, and welcome to CRAM. CRAM is an acronym for Communicating Research and More, which is what we try to do on this podcast. A lot of exciting research and groundbreaking ideas never reach the public, but they have the potential to change the way we think and act. What can nurses learn from dancers? That's not a trick question, but it may sound like one. Hard to believe that the two have anything in common, but ask Coralee McLaren. She was a professional dancer with one of the country's finest contemporary dance groups, Toronto Dance Theatre. Then she became a pediatric nurse. And now she's a researcher and professor of nursing at Ryerson University in Toronto. We're going to talk about the unlikely intersection of nursing and dancing, as well as their current research involving children and the relationship between movement and learning. Hello, Coralee.
Hello, Mary. So nice to see you, and thank you for having me today.
Oh, it's great to have you here. I want to go back and ask you about how you went from dancing into nursing.
It's a good question, and it was a pivotal moment in my life as well. I had been dancing with the Toronto Dance Theatre for over a decade. I always knew that I wanted to go back to school. I wasn't sure when that transition would happen, but it came a point in my career where I was very interested in the body, ways of knowing, and how to extend that into another career. So nursing made sense at that point because of the relationship between ways of knowing the body in particular ways, and also to explore a little bit more what I had experienced as a dancer and how that might relate to another profession that is based profoundly on the body and physical health. So that was the transition I wanted to make, and I was ready for it at the time when I left the company and entered this career.
I should tell people that I first heard about you. It was through the Research Learning Festival that I had launched a couple of years ago. And someone said to me, "Oh, you might be interested in having Cora McLaren speak at this because she's got a very interesting topic about what nurses can learn from dancers." And that, to me, that was a head turner when I heard it at the time. And I spoke to a number of people and I said, "What do you think about this?" There's a woman who talks about the intersection of nursing and dancing. And every person I told that to, they had the same reaction. What? What could they have in common? What could nurses learn from dancers? And so, I posed that question to you because I think for many people, they're trying to understand, like, what is that relationship? Because I think to the untrained person, they don't see it.
Well, at first I didn't see it either. I knew that I wanted to extend my knowledge, to understand the body in a different way, but it's taken me a long time really to see what that intersection means and the profound possibilities of what that intersection can be. So the question is interesting, Mary, because I think we have to be careful really about suggesting that these are two separate bodies of knowledge, that dancers know one way of knowing the body and nurses know another way of knowing the body. Indeed we do, because that's the craft that we develop and hone depending on the career and the choices that you make. But there's a lot of overlap here.
So can you give me an example? Is it an experience that the dancers have that they can share with the nurses, or are they trying to impart to nurses to become more in touch with their bodies in the way that dancers would be in touch with their bodies through the act of dancing?
I would say the latter, Mary. That was quite well articulated, what you just said, in that it's a kind of an awareness. That's what I'm saying. I feel that nurses already know this. But it's the dancers that can perhaps bring that out in the nurses as well, too, in understanding just how much their bodies are used and incorporated in caring for others. How close, what's the proximity that we have? And isn't that an interesting question, really, in the world that we're living in right now and this health crisis. But what does proximity do to caring for one another? The fact that we have to distance
Mm.
from one another, and not only nurses, but all of us have to distance from one another. What does that do? How does that change our relationships? How does that change our thinking? How do we interact with one another when we have to do this at a distance? You and I, right now, speaking to one another, the conversation and the relationship will be different simply because we do not have that close proximity to one another. I can't see the same gestures that you might make, or the way that you are looking at me, or the way that we might, I might touch your arm or you might touch
Mm.
mine.
Mhm.
That sense of interconnection, that sense of intimacy, that sense of knowing one another on a highly physical and an embodied manner.
Yeah, no, I understand. As soon as you said awareness, I understand that because I could imagine, and this wouldn't be just nurses, but so many of us go through our daily movements and jobs without thinking or being aware of our bodies,
Hmm.
about that relationship, that as you talk about the proximity to other people, the different kinds of awareness we have depending on who we're talking to and dealing
Hmm.
with.
Hmm.
So is that what you're talking about? Being, and I guess it's also about being in the moment, being aware of our presence and other people's presence and our relationship with them.
Absolutely. And look at how that has significantly changed now because of the
Yes.
pandemic. The fact that we have become acutely aware of our proximity and our relationship and our physical connection with people. Unfortunately, it's taken a kind of um, difficult set of circumstances to in a sense bring this new awareness to how we actually move with other people. Now I'm speaking about it in a more generalized way, even like how you move through a grocery store or how you cross someone on a sidewalk. I mean, it's a new awareness, it's a new attunement. And I can certainly say to you now, although I am not on the front line, and I am so grateful for the work that frontline nurses are doing, and the kinds of incredible care that they're delivering to their clients and families. But I would imagine as well too that that awareness as well too has come into their practice in a particular kind of way, because nurses are trained and are they have developed that knowing and that craft to be able to be close to people, to be able to interact, touch, nonverbal communication, gesturing, and again, I really highlight this notion of proximity.
I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. Why should this question just be limited to nurses?
You know, the days are gone where we can work within our silos. That dancers
Mm.
have their own, knowledge and sets of skills, and it has an embodied impetus, and that nurses, have, their body of knowledge and, scientific reasoning and clinical judgment and such. Of course we do, because that's the way that we've been trained and crafted. But to bring those together, to begin understanding how one can influence the other, how we might shift together. It's an opening under such a challenging and trying time in our
Mhm.
history,
Mhm.
to be able to crack this open, be together, move together, which we're all yearning for, but also letting that take a turn for how we think together in different ways. And we need
Yeah,
that.
and
We need creative
we
solutions.
yes. Yeah, yeah, and
Absolutely.
you're right, and I mean, as it is, I find you're right. I mean, very often when I'm with people, and this is before the pandemic, I just don't really think about their physical presence or the fact that they're there, they're in front of me. I'm concentrating on whatever it is we have to get done, if it comes to work and my colleagues. And now with the pandemic, even more so, it's easy to just forget about that because the physical presence isn't even here. It's on a Zoom screen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So you're absolutely right in that we do have to rethink of the ways we are connecting and how we're doing that. And how do we still keep that I don't know what it is, that sort of magic of the relationship, that when we have that with someone physically being there, how do we create that?
And it's hard to explain what that is, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Like,
Yeah, I'm
what
kind of
is
grasping
that?
for the words. What is that?
I know. So,
It's
well,
a kind of an energy. It's yeah.
Tell me about words. I mean, it's really hard to find the words to describe that. I have found that really difficult over the last 10 years in being able to describe exactly what that is. And that's why you use these different disciplines to find the words. I've relied on philosophy. I'm relying on the great knowledge of neuroscientists to help me understand as well too what might be going on in the brain in these interactions. So we need each other right now to be able to pull these ideas together and again try to create some of these creative solutions to very complex problems.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, it's interesting what you're doing with this concept, and you are now applying it to children.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea of movement and its impact on children and learning. Can you talk about that?
I'll draw on the work I did, my dissertation work in an integrated kindergarten classroom. Within this classroom, children of diverse abilities were moving together. And, I went in as a nurse. I wanted to understand how children were moving in relationship to the physical environment. So what was it in the room? What was it in that classroom that was encouraging children to move in particular ways? And also for the children that were using mobility devices, I was intrigued as how they used their mobility devices in that classroom as well too, what some of the obstacles were and the sort of creativity that they used to move about in the classroom. So I went in as a nurse, and I realized really quickly on that I could not just rely on my own understanding and knowledge of movement as a nurse. I was actually in that room as a I don't know what to call myself. I don't like labeling labeling things, but a kind of dancer, nurse, researcher, because I couldn't separate those two things. I was watching children move together as a choreographer would, or as a dancer would, so I could see how the tempo changes would occur in the classroom, changes in rhythm, changes in flow of how children would watch one another and mimic one another, copy one another. And it was based on these changes of tempo that created new ways of moving and new ways of moving together. So I realized that there wasn't really that place where a child could watch another child move and then make this sort of cognitive decision, oh, I'm going to move like my friend. But it was so fast and so quick that whatever that change in movement was, another child was already in the wake of that movement, of copying, of mimicking.
So give me an example. What would happen, for example?
So if a child, this particular classroom had a very interesting architectural formation. So there was two sides of the room, but it was connected with a kind of corridor. So as soon as a child would move across that corridor, a kind of unprescribed space, right, where children could probably move any way that they wanted to in the classroom. Right. So they spent a lot of time in that corridor. One child would move along, and I could almost predict it. Like within 4 or 5 seconds, another child would follow behind, either running, skipping, galloping, almost trying to adopt that kind of change in rhythm and tempo and flow. It's almost like they moved each other around the classroom through movement, not decision making, but just by following the flow of what was happening in the classroom.
So was it they were almost mimicking?
Yeah.
Like naturally, right? It was just kind of almost spontaneous. And children do this.
Of course. That's what's so fascinating about watching it in a playground. It's so beautiful. Mm-hmm.
You know what? Okay, so I think I knew this, but I never really, no, do you know what I mean? You know this kind of inside you, but you don't really articulate it. It's just kind of taken for granted. But now that you bring it up, why do we do this? Why do children do that?
Why do we? It's
why do we mimic? Why do we and you call it synchronous movement, right?
I do.
Where it's synchronized. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a big question. And I don't know that we know the full answer to that yet. I know through the work that I've been doing over the last decade or so that, and this really comes through advances in neuroimaging and such, that we do understand more now that there are quite clear connections within the brain that links movement to learning. So we can understand that the movement components of a brain, so your cerebellum, for instance, there's circuitry and connections to your prefrontal cortex where we learn and we reason. So, and just taking that very simple idea, and I wouldn't go beyond that because I'm not a neuroscientist, and I would leave that to those knowledgeable souls that can articulate that better than I can. But we know that through movement, children are learning in a different way. And that's what I'm fascinated about. So
when you say they're learning, they're learning in a different way. Mm-hmm. What are they learning?
I'm not sure yet. That's what this research is about. We're trying to understand if movement itself can eventually, we're inferring here, eventually can actually change the pattern in which a child learns. So are they learning in a more optimal way? Are their memories improved? Is there more verbal fluency? We understand as well too from a lot of the literature that gesturing, if you teach using your hands and your body movements to teach a mathematical equation in particular ways, that children are learning through movement and understanding what that logic is through the use of gesture, which is totally fascinating as well too.
Mm-hmm. Is that knowledge that they might be acquiring through movement a different kind of knowledge in that it almost involves empathy because they're mimicking or they're copying the movement of another, and there's some kind of I can't even describe it. But there's some sort of a movement knowledge now that they're achieving because now they have copied the movement of another child.
Absolutely, Mary. And there is research evidence supporting that.
Oh, okay. So
particularly, I won't speak to empathy, but I know around cooperation that if children are moving together, they are more apt to cooperate with one another. I've read some research too that there's just a kind of affinity to someone as well too, a way of enjoying that person in their presence because you're moving together, that you're accomplishing something together, that you are sharing something on a certain level. I think it's highly, there's such an interesting neurological connection that is, the basis of what I'm trying to explore right now. But I think on a social level and on a physio-social level, that there's a lot going on there in that connection with another person and what can be achieved in learning, cooperation, empathy. Perhaps I don't know that literature so much, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's quite a bit out there about that.
Okay, so then when you bring in the aspect that you have diverse children here who, and some, I guess, were using mobility devices, how does that play into all this? Because they're moving in a different way.
They certainly are. But that
if they, in fact, they are moving at all, I don't even know. I mean, maybe some are not. Yeah.
Well, definitely, depending on the child, there will be a range of mobility capacity. I'll say. I don't want to use the word limitation. I say capacity. But the creativity, Mary, I can't even begin to tell you. I mean, I had like 50 hours of video data where I would go like minute by minute and just watching the capacity of these children and the way that they can use those mobility devices, the way that they could use the room in such creative ways to not only to gain access or to be functional in a way from moving from point A to point B, but that movement from point A to point B was some of the most creative movement that I've ever seen in my life. To be able to use a wheelchair in a way where you almost couldn't tell that the wheelchair was separate from the child's body, that the child had this great finesse of being able to use a mobility device in ways that that a dancer, could only really aspire to. That kind of creativity, the use of gravity, the change in tempo, that mimicking and copying, but integrating their mobility device as part of their bodies and as part of the larger part of the room. Absolutely
Oh,
fascinating.
that is because are you thinking that perhaps by being allowed to express their creativity through movement in those ways, they are nurturing other parts of their brain
Absolutely.
and the potential
It's the
of,
potential.
yeah,
It's absolutely about the potential. And I will speak as well too, Mary, because you said for some children who may not be have as much mobility license, we do know neurologically as well too is something called the mirror neurons system that
what are those? What are the mirror
the
neurons?
mirror neurons are the parts or the system is part of our brain where if you observe movement, it's been shown that that the corresponding component of your brain is activated whether you're moving or not. So when you're watching movement,
Right?
your brain is still being activated in a particular way as if you were moving. And that's
Exactly the same way as if you're moving?
well, we
Or
don't know.
oh,
We
okay.
don't.
But
Well,
there
I
is
don't
is
know. I don't know. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm sure there's many people who know. Have far more work and research and knowledge about that than I do. But we do know that there is a link simply by observing movement that corresponding region of your brain is being activated in a similar way. So that has profound implications for children with disabilities. So if they're not moving in the same kind of vigorous way that maybe some of their classmates are moving, if they're in the vortex of that, protected, of course, but in the vortex of this movement and flow and change of tempo in a classroom or any play learn area, that we are likely to know that their brains are being activated in a way that would be similar to moving. So that's really interesting because how do we move a child then
Mm.
if their brain is already activated in that way? How do we move a child to actually displace that movement? How does it become actualized? What is that interval between watching movement and actually watching movement displace in a particular way? And I'm really fascinated by that interval.
Yeah. And just to bring that home, I mean, when I think of the times when I'm not moving, but I am watching movement, as in dance,
Yes.
because I love dance. Like this whole thing really speaks to me. So when I'm watching a dance performance, I can actually pretend. I don't know what it is, but I feel as if I'm embodying the body of that person who's dancing. And I can feel myself going through the movements. I could possibly even break into a sweat if I really concentrated hard. But so what is that? You know what I mean, Cora? What's going on there?
So I think there is a physiological neurological response that's
Do you,
happening. And
have
also
you
there's
had that? Have you had that
oh
happen?
yeah,
Do you do that?
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I we used to, I've watched a lot of dance in my life as well too, and together with my dear colleague Christopher House, who is artistic director of the Toronto Dance Theatre, we watched a lot of dance together and danced together. But he would often leave a theater sometimes, and it was especially around movement that we were familiar with. So maybe a modern dance repertoire or vocabulary that was familiar to us. And he would walk out and he'd say, "I'm so exhausted," but love it. But having loved what we just witnessed in all of its entirety and the aesthetic pleasure and the beauty and the visual and the sound, but the fact that you felt this kind of mental exhaustion suggests as well too that you're dancing. You are actually dancing with the people that you're
Yes.
watching.
And to
Absolutely.
me too, I mean, it strikes me there's got to be something good about using that part of the brain, keeping it
Mm-hmm.
functioning, keeping it exercised, right? That
Mm-hmm.
part of the brain that
Mm-hmm.
involves watching movement.
Hmm.
And I mean, if that's the case too, I'm thinking, what will be the role of, AI and virtual reality? and
Hmm.
and and children and well, anyone perhaps who has limited physical mobility, but they are able to exist in a form in a virtual world where they are able to move and they can feel it, they
Hmm.
can experience it, right? I mean, the
Hmm.
potential is huge.
The potential is absolutely huge. I would love to jump there. And I know a lot of people are doing work in that area as
Ah.
well too, and around children, as you say, with physical disabilities as well too, to create that kind of augmented environment in which they
Mhm.
can experience their bodies in a different way. I mean, even the notion of gravity, of changing gravity for a child who may rely on a mobility device uh, to be released in a sense and experience gravity in a different way. Uh, you know, could possibly have profound effects. We don't know what those are yet, but I mean, it
Mhm.
really is. The a future. Um, Area of research that I know people are tapping into already. Like, well, why wouldn't we? If that's what there's two
Yeah,
disciplines,
yeah.
if there's two disciplines that we want to try and bring together, it's healthcare and the kind of technologies that we have right now to be able to influence and impact how we physically experience our own bodies and how we experience physical movement with others.
And
Absolutely.
you were saying there's evidence. I'm wondering how much evidence is there that connects movement with learning
Uh,
and
uh,
children?
uh, Well, there's enough fundamental research to be able to take that question and explore it.
Hmm.
So that's where I am in terms of the neuroimaging and such. We have made that connection, and that's already coming into practice in educational settings as well too. I mean, gone are the days where you remember the days when, and you and I probably from a similar sort of generation of educational training where you were asked to sit still at a desk with your hands on the desk,
Yes.
keep your gaze forward, temper your movement. If you're moving too much or fidgeting, then clearly you're not
You're not paying
focusing,
attention.
not paying
Right.
attention, and you're probably not learning. But there's enough neurological evidence to suggest that it might be the opposite. That we do need to move. We do need to um, think while in movement. Even before our interview today, Mary, I was thinking about, you know, what we might talk about, and I do this all the time. I've just become conscious, or my kids reminded me, Mom, you're pacing, you're moving back and forth again. You're
Uh,
pacing, you're thinking, and it's not out of nervousness or anxiety. It's because that's how I think. I have to move. It's even, if it would be best if I was moving now, actually, and speaking to you, because it generates a new way of, for me, anyways, you said that you felt refreshed earlier, but for
yes.
me, I feel intellectually engaged when I'm moving.
And I bet there are different degrees, right, for different people of how
Mm-hmm,
much they
mm-hmm,
need to move. When they're thinking, what different kinds of thinking. I mean, what
mm-hmm.
if you say there's enough research that supports the sort of fundamentally this connection? I mean, what does that mean then about the way the classroom is set up? Because,
Uh-huh.
right? I mean, because sure, you said, well, before we were told to sit still, but we are still told our children are told to sit still and learn. They can move at different times
Mm-hmm.
of the
It's
day, but
regulated.
it's
It's
very,
regulated.
exactly, it's very
Yeah,
prescribed.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
like, what do you think about that? And how do you foresee perhaps changes
Mm-hmm.
in sort of the classroom and optimal learning conditions?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's kind of a paradigm shift when you think about it, right? Because that's we've all been for a very long time um, learning and thinking in ways that followed that rationale. So it is a bit of a shift, but you already see this happening in classrooms, and such great educators right now of understanding the importance of movement and maybe creating that flexibility around movement. And I'm not in any way suggesting a free-for-all in a classroom where children are,
Yeah,
let
because the
loose.
teachers, oh my goodness. Yeah.
Let loose in the classroom, and you don't
Chaos.
need any structure, and just let them move because it's good for their brains. I'm not suggesting that at all. I mean, there's there's no freedom in freedom. There is freedom in structure, and I draw on Martha Graham, in the great modern dance pioneer. Freedom. There's no freedom in freedom. There's freedom in structure. So we can put parameters around, but to create that kind of movement within that, a modifiable structures in a classroom where children have the choice of moving things in a particular way or creating different spaces or subspaces and such for themselves too. And that might even, be an interesting way of thinking about spaces, especially given the times that we're living in now and where children have been uh, um, restricted from being with one another at school. How are we going to design these spaces for, and heaven forbid this never happens again, we need to be past this crisis right now. But if it were to happen again, how can we keep children together still in a classroom, keep them safe,
Mm-hmm.
keep them protected from whatever we might be facing, but still able to be together to find new ways of creating proximity. What does that mean? Does it mean looking at each other but still from a distance to still sense each other's movement in a classroom? So how do we design those classrooms to do that? They can't be desks. They can't be desks in a row anymore. It's
Right,
got to be
right.
modified. The physical environment has to move as much as we want to move. We need environments that can move.
Do you know whether sort of in a big way this is being embraced? I don't know if it would be in Canada or anywhere around the world. What,
Yeah. So
really innovative kind of
yeah. So
approaches. Yeah.
I would say a lot of the education system in Sweden and in Finland, and they really are at the forefront
Mm.
of some of these innovative ideas and this notion of um, uh, embodied learning and what that does for a child's well-being on so many levels. We're not just talking a learning and intellectual level, but on a physical, social, emotional level. How is that affecting their lives?
Oh, it just, your research, it raises so many questions and so many possibilities about
Mm-hmm.
human well-being. Really, right? That's what it comes to. It's about human well-being, learning, and that's all part of it. And
Absolutely.
I mean, I know you're doing a lot of research coming up. Is there anything in particular, sort of one thing that really excites you that, you love to find the answer to this question?
Well, again, Mary, it's
Like
going to be
just
tricky
totally
for
blue
me.
sky, this is what I would love to know the answer to.
I am fascinated by this notion of what is happening in children's brains before they move. I'm absolutely
Before they
fascinated by
move.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So this in upcoming studies now and research that's being generated, we're going to take a look at that again. It's really hard to capture because you need, the kinds of technical
Oh, yeah. Do you need like brain
advancements.
scans and all that?
Using EEG and such,
EEGs?
yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So to be able to understand what's happening on a neurological level when children are watching each other move. So I really am fascinated about that. I don't know if I'll ever have an answer for you, Mary, but I bet that we'll know more over the next a little while of what that looks like. And there's some really wonderful work at McMaster as well too at the Live Lab. They really are exploring some of these questions on a neurological level. Why do we move the way that we do?
Mm.
Why do we have this affinity to move with others? What do we learn by doing that? How do we change? How do we feel? As you say, it's about well-being. How does that change who we are and our
Yeah.
sensibility
Oh,
and health and health? Mm-hmm.
exciting research. Thank you so much for sharing it with us, Cora, and best of luck as you move
Thank
ahead.
you. Thank you so much. It was a lovely conversation.
That's Coralee McLaren. She was a professional dancer with the Toronto Dance Theatre for over a decade, and she is now an assistant professor in the Daphne Cockwell School of Nursing at Ryerson University in Toronto. She's been studying the effect of movement on children's learning abilities, and if you'd like to know more about her work, you can check out our show notes. That is it for this edition of the Cram Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Our thanks to the Temerty Foundation for their generous support of our podcast. And you might also be interested in our literary podcast called Passage to Wonderland. I highlight compelling passages from books that offer discovery, insight, and resolution. So please check that out. Thanks very much for joining us. See you next time.